Okay, so I think we're good to start now. Good morning, everyone. On behalf of the Spanish Chamber of Commerce in the UK, I'd like to give you all a very warm welcome to this webinar on the topic cybersecurity threats and their impact on business and how to protect our companies. Just as a quick disclaimer, we will be recording this session and it will be shared with you all after, following the webinar. We're holding the session today with Chamber Member Stratesys. Stratesys is a Spanish company with a strong presence in Spain, Portugal, and Latam. And since the last few years, they are trying to expand their business here in the UK as well. They provide professional services, and their mission is to help companies transform and protect their businesses in this digital ecosystem that we are living today. They are experts in different technologies such as SAP, OpenText, human capital management, treasury, Microsoft, etc. And in the past few years, they have diversified their portfolio of services, developing other areas of expertise such as innovation and artificial intelligence, and of course, cybersecurity, the line of business that Javier, our speaker of today, leads. Javier, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Javier has over 10 years experience working in cybersecurity at different levels. First, as a consultant supporting companies to assess and manage their security risks. Then, as part of the cybersecurity teams of private companies, developing and implementing cybersecurity strategies. And also as part of cybersecurity providers, helping companies to improve their cybersecurity capabilities from a technical perspective. He has accumulated experience at different fields, just as governance, security architecture, defense, detection and response, and operational resilience, etc. For the last couple of years, he's responsible for developing the cybersecurity strategy at Stratesys, managing a team of 20 people now. Following to Javier's presentation this morning, we'll have time for some questions and answers, like 10 minutes or so. So please feel free to put your questions in the questions and answers sections below. You have there a button to pop their questions, and Javier will be happy to answer them all at the end of the session. That's all for me now, and thank you, Javier, for joining us, and over to you now.
Perfect. Can you hear me properly? Okay, so good morning, everybody. Thank you all for your interest in this webinar and for joining me today in this session organized by the Spanish Chamber of Commerce in the UK. Thanks to the Chamber for inviting Stratesys as well, and also to Alicia and Rebecca for organizing the session, and of course for the great introduction. So before we start, I would like to make a quick question to all of you, just to check the level of knowledge of my audience regarding cybersecurity, so I can adapt a little bit my speech. I'd like to know how many of you work as part of a cybersecurity team or as part of a technical team in your company. I don't know, IT, infrastructure, architecture, cloud development. Could you please type on the chat those who work on a technical team? So let's give like 15 or 20 seconds. All right, so it seems not many of you work on technical teams, but that's perfect because I don't want to make it very technical today. And of course, I don't want to make it commercial at all. This is an informative session where we will discuss about cyber insecurity threats and their impact on our companies. And this is important for everybody, not only for cybersecurity professionals. So referring to cyber insecurity, I think that this is a great definition for what we are living today in this digital era in which we all operate. And this is a term that the World Economic Forum has addressed in the last couple of years as highly relevant for our society, not only for today, for the present, but also for the future to come. But before entering into more details, let me go through the agenda of today's session. The presentation is divided into two parts. In the first half, we will discuss about cybersecurity from the attacker's perspective. First of all, we will dedicate some minutes to understand the context and trends of cyber insecurity. Then we will follow with a review of recent real examples of cyber attacks. You will see that the context and the type of attacks that we describe in the first place will be perfectly reflected with these real examples. Moving forward, we will analyze who is behind these attacks. Let me advance you that they are groups of cybercrime, also known as advanced persistent threats, or APTs. We will repeat this very often along the presentation. And then we will discuss the big impact that these attacks and these groups can make on our companies. And in the second part of the presentation, we will talk from the defender's perspective. So we will discuss 4 measures to protect our companies from these risks. And I have also prepared a kind of bonus track detailing how to protect ourselves also from an end user's perspective. So of course, as Alicia said at the beginning, before we close the session, there will be some time for the questions and answers. So you can type your questions in the chat during the session, and we will go through them at the end. So something I hope it's clear is that today, cybersecurity risks are or should be one of the main corporate priorities for any company, due to both the frequency and the potential impact of cyber attacks on businesses. Let me elaborate a bit more why. As I said before, the World Economic Forum in their annual Global Risk Report has addressed for the past few years already that cyber insecurity is one of the main global threats, not only for private and public companies, but also for the whole society. And it makes sense because in the last few years, we have identified a big rise, a big increase of cyber attacks, not only in volume, but also in sophistication. And these attacks are now targeting any company, no matter its size, its market, or business. Why? Because attackers are mainly motivated by economic purposes, and they know that most of the companies would pay money to recover their systems or to recover their sensitive information, their sensitive data, in case they are compromised or stolen. We will review later in more detail the impact that attacks may have on companies, but there are several studies performed in the last years that say that in some cases, attackers have been infiltrated in the victims' systems and networks for more than 100 days without being detected, getting familiar with the environment, searching and exfiltrating sensitive data before they finally deployed the big attack and caused the impact on the company's system. And also there are other studies that say that the cost of a cyber attack may rise up to $5 million in some cases, and even more, as we will see in the following slide. But in the middle of all this negative information, the good news is that cyber attacks can be prevented in some cases. I would never say that they can be totally avoided, because as I said before, any company can be under attack, but they can be prevented if companies get prepared. For instance, the root cause of behind at least half of cyber attacks is human error. So that means that some attacks could be prevented if we train and create awareness among our users. In the middle of the slide, I have selected which I consider the 3 most relevant cybersecurity threats nowadays. There are many more, but I want to focus on these 3. The first one is social engineering, or attacks targeting our people, our users, with the objective to fool them and to steal their user credentials to be used as part of the initial access to companies' systems, networks, or applications. The second one is the supply chain attacks, or how to get access to our company's systems, exploiting the relationship with our third parties or collaborators. And we all have many different collaborators. And last but not least is the ransomware attacks and the threat actors known as APTs, Advanced Persistent Threats. These groups target private companies and also critical infrastructures of mainly Western countries, searching first an economic benefit, and on the other hand, to cause instability in the society and public community as well. We will elaborate a bit further about these groups during the whole session. And if you review the trends for the near future, and in order to add a bit more fuel to the fire, it's expected that with the rise of generative artificial intelligence, the threats of cyber insecurity will not disappear. On the contrary. First of all, during 2024 and in the coming years, we expect to see an increase of attacks both in volume and sophistication, thanks to the use of generative artificial intelligence by our adversaries. For instance, it can assist with the development of phishing and malware campaigns, elaborating more sophisticated attacks that are even more difficult to be detected by our traditional security tools. Secondly, something that is remarked and highlighted as part of the World Economic Forum risk report, artificial intelligence advances pose big risk to misinformation and deepfakes. For instance, organized campaigns by these APTs spreading misinformation through social media or other channels can influence on public opinions and even can influence on elections results. And 2024 is an elections year in many of the most important countries. And in the specific case of deepfakes, artificial intelligence generated deepfakes videos and audio recordings can be used to spread false information and to fool people, to fool our users, which in corporate environments can lead to fraudulent transactions and financial impact if the CEO or the top management are the ones that are impersonated by the deepfakes. Imagine that you take part of a Teams meeting where your CEO or your CFO approves $1 million transaction that you must execute if that is your role. And this has already happened with the use of deepfakes, and the impact on the companies can be huge. But again, to set some clarity among so much darkness, we have also seen in the last years a reinforcement of cybersecurity directives and regulations, not only in the European Union with directives such as the second version of the Network Information Security, NIS, and DORA, the Digital Operational Resilience Act, but also in the US, Australia, and in the UK. This regulation defines corporate responsibilities to properly manage cybersecurity risks and incidents. And I consider that these regulations will increase in the short term the level of maturity in cybersecurity, not only for the companies affected directly by these regulations, but also for their third parties and collaborators. And this will contribute to more protected companies that provide safer and more secure services to our society, which is a positive point. So we have seen three main threats in this slide: social engineering, ransomware attacks, and supply chain attacks. In the following slide, we will see real examples of each of these attacks in action. So let's review a couple of recent cyber attacks to big companies. The first one is the attack to MGM Resorts in Las Vegas, which happened last October. MGM Resorts runs many of the most popular casinos and hotels in Las Vegas, including the Bellagio and the Mandalay Bay. Basically, in this case, the attack to this company started through the use of social engineering techniques and ended up with a ransomware affecting all the computer systems, the telephone networks, the casino machines, the hotel systems as well, such as the key readers and even the elevators. All of them, including the casino machines, were totally blocked and inoperative by the ransomware during several days or even weeks. And all it took to the ransomware group to compromise MGM Resorts was to search on LinkedIn, find an employee of the company, then call the help desk and get the credentials for that employee account. What I have read in this case several times in the news is that a company that is valued at $33 billion was defeated by a 10-minute conversation by an attacker. Moving forward, we have a very recent example of a supply chain attack with the attack to AnyDesk. AnyDesk is a remote access software used by thousands of companies. I'm pretty sure that many of you use AnyDesk in your companies. So if AnyDesk is compromised, any system with AnyDesk installed on it might be compromised as well. This is the big risk of a supply chain attack. In this specific case, AnyDesk rapidly released a new version of the software, replacing the compromised certificates, and asked their users to install the update. But user credentials might have also been compromised, so it's important that companies using AnyDesk not only update to the latest version of the software, but also change their passwords to be safe. And The third example is an attack that happened to Orange in Spain at the beginning of this year. First of all, several weeks in advance to the attack, the attacker was able to install an info stealer in the computer of a system administrator of the company through a phishing attack. And then several weeks later, he was able to steal the credential used by this system administrator to manage the internet registries of the company through RIPE, R-I-P-E. That is the organization that allocates IP addresses in Europe. So once the attacker had compromised the admin password, he could access the RIPE admin page and modify the way IP addresses were assigned and managed by Orange here in Spain, causing a direct impact to several Orange internet users. But what is more funny of this case is that even though in this case the credentials were stolen using an info stealer malware, the attacker could have also tried to figure out the credentials, the password, because the password used by this system administrator to access RIPE and administer all the IPs managed by Orange was RIPE admin. So this emphasizes the need to protect the access to critical resources and assets, not only using strong passwords, but also with the use, for instance, of multi-factor authentication. So we have seen three different types of attacks here. And the question now is, who is usually behind these big attacks? Well, the answer, we already know it, we have already commented, is advanced persistent threats, these APTs. These are groups of cyber criminals that are directly or indirectly involved in many of the attacks that we see in these days. As I said, they are groups of cybercrime, also known as threat actors, that are usually linked and sponsored by some nation-state governments, such as Russia, China, North Korea, or Iran. They are pretty well organized. They have a lot of resources, and they look like real corporations. Actually, they have HR and sales departments. They have IT and infrastructure teams. They have technical teams that carry out the attacks. And of course, and this is the dangerous part, they have people dedicated to spread the message through the dark web and to pay big rewards for network or system access to any company, which has generated a complete network of what is called ransomware as a service affiliates in the underground, so in the dark web markets, and more specifically, has generated the rise of smaller attackers, also known as initial access brokers, who carry out this initial compromise of user credentials and sell them to these threat actors. With that initial access that they usually buy, this group of actors elaborate, as we have seen before, highly sophisticated attacks targeting specific companies in the Western countries and also targeting critical infrastructures. And their motivations are sometimes political, searching to cause instability in the Western societies, but in most of the cases, they act just for economic purposes, searching to make money from the attacks. Below, you can see some of the fancy names that these APTs groups use, such as Fancy Bear, No Name, Lockbit, Lazarus, and so on. They use these fancy names and they recognize cyber attacks and take ownership of them, just like real groups of terrorists do. If you want to know more about ransomware as a service, I have included here a link to an article I wrote about this topic last year. It's in Spanish, but if you need it, you can ask ChatGPT to translate it. So you can access the link later when you get the presentation. In the following slide, I show what I have just commented, that these APTs are really organized like authentic corporations with different departments and creating a network of affiliates on the underground, which has generated a huge market, black market in the dark web. So as you can see, they have development teams in charge of developing the malware and exploits. They have IT teams in charge of the infrastructure setup needed to realize the attacks, even HR and sales departments for recruiting and advertising on the dark web, the offensive teams, so the most technical hackers responsible to carry out the attack once they are in the network of the victims, the support teams to provide support to the ransomware affiliates, and the network access buyers who are in charge of seeking and purchasing this network or system access to companies in different forums, in different markets, even in Telegram. And below you can see that there is a complete and huge network of affiliates that carry out this initial access compromise to the victims. But is it possible to anticipate to these groups, or do we know how they usually act, or what are the steps that they usually follow to attack a company? Actually, yes. So let's move forward to know a little bit more about these groups and how they attack. There are organizations that has dedicated time and resources to study the way these threat actors carry out cyber attacks, and that has defined a matrix of tactics, techniques, and procedures used by these attackers, and that this information is public and can and should be consulted by companies to protect from these threats. In this case, I'm showing the main tactics used by the attackers as defined by the Mitre attack framework. So I don't want to enter into technical details, but I just want to highlight 3 of these phases. The first 2 tactics, so the first 2 boxes, are related to reconnaissance and preparation, which means searching information about your company, about the victim and their employees on the internet and also in the deep web, and trying to elaborate an attack scenario. Then they try to get that initial access. I have already repeated these words a couple of times during the presentation. And it's key to stop the attackers before they get this initial access to our systems, because once they get access to our systems, networks, or applications, they will manage to create persistence, to escalate privilege, to evade our defenses, and to move on the network in order to create the real impact of the attack that is first exfiltrating sensitive and confidential information. So I mean stealing it from our systems, and then deploying the ransomware attack to encrypt the systems. So putting it simple, how can we avoid this impact? If we stop the attackers before they get the initial access, we can avoid this impact, right? And what are the main techniques used by these attackers during this phase? One is to compromise user credentials, and so they can use valid credentials to access the systems. Another technique is to exploit public-facing applications that have known vulnerabilities, so meaning software that is not properly managed or updated. So we will discuss later with more detail how to protect our companies. But at this moment, it seems that if we train our users to create strong passwords, and we use multi-factor authentication to protect our accesses, and we also define continuous vulnerability management processes to keep our systems updated, we should be protected, right? Well, more or less, because the idea, as we will discuss later, is to define a defense in-depth strategy so that we can protect from the attackers in all the different phases that we see here. So that if they finally manage to get access to our systems, we have capabilities to detect them, to revoke their access, and to respond to the incident and recover our systems if needed on time. So in order to finish with this first part of the presentation, I just want to highlight the potential impacts that these cyber attacks can have on our companies. So there are different types of impacts that an attack can generate on a company, but all of them, at the end of the day, have indirectly suppose an economic or financial impact on the business. The first type of impact is the operational impact, with the shutdown of production systems and applications. For instance, in the case of the MGM ransomware attack that we saw before, the company announced that they were losing more than $6 million every day that the system were down by the attack. In total, after the attack, after several weeks happened and they recovered from the attack, they announced that they had lost more than $100 million because of the attack. The second type is the reputational impact, affecting on a negative way to the company's brand and reputation. Most of all, if the company is not prepared in advance and the incident is not managed properly by the company. A cybersecurity incident can mean the potential loss of current and future clients for a company. And the third type of impact is related to regulatory compliance. So the lack of compliance with certain regulations or directives, such as GDPR for privacy or NIS, Network Information Security for cybersecurity, can suppose very big fines to affected companies. To mention a few examples, Meta, for instance, has accumulated more than 2 billion euros in fines since GDPR entered into force in 2018. Other cases of companies in the UK, for instance, British Airways and Marriott, both have suffered a 20 million euros fine in the last years because of non-compliance with GDPR. This year, in addition, the NIS directive enters into force in the following, this year, and it will be likely that in the following years, we will see more fines related to cybersecurity incidents and non-compliance with this regulation. Apart from these three types of impact, there might be more financial impacts to the company, such as the one that derivates from the recovery of the affected systems or from the raise on payment, which should never happen, but there are cases. At the end of the day, as we saw in the first slide, the cost of a cyber attack, depending on the impact, is on average, or might be on average, $5 million, which can be maybe affordable for big companies, but not so much for small and medium businesses. In Spain, 57% of the small and medium enterprises that cease their activities is due to a cyber attack, and that's a terrible data. So far, the presentation was about creating, let's say, an atmosphere of fright. So let's shift now to what can we do to protect our companies from these harmful threats. So in the following slides, I will give you 4 tips to protect your companies, ranging from basics to more advanced level of maturity. For those of you who work on big companies, maybe the first 2 basic topics are clear and are already managed, but the medium and advanced topics are very interesting for all of us. And then I have also prepared some tips from an end user perspective to review what can we do to protect ourselves in our personal lives from these threats as well. So let's go through that. The first measure to protect our company is to adopt a cybersecurity framework. These are industry standards that are publicly available to anyone and that can be used to know and to follow best practices in cybersecurity. For instance, the NIST cybersecurity framework or the CIS security controls framework are a couple of examples. In Spain, we also have the National Security Scheme, that is a mandate for public companies and for private companies that collaborate with them as well. With these frameworks by hand, companies can establish a complete and mature cybersecurity strategy, adapting the frameworks to their businesses. And what are the steps that we need to follow in order to adopt these kind of frameworks? First, we need to understand each control objective defined by the framework, and we need to assess it to identify our security gaps or our security risk in our systems, business processes, and people related to each of these control objectives. Then we need to define adapted security measures or action plans following the recommendations of the frameworks in order to address or to close these gaps. And of course, we have to prioritize based on a cost-benefit analysis and our business needs and risk appetite. With all of this, we can create a security plan or a security strategy in order to improve our level of maturity in different categories, such as the NIST framework defines, governance, identification, protection, detection, response, and recovery. This is the first basic step that all companies should do to start their cybersecurity journey. But what's next? So the second activity is to train our users. As we have seen before, most of the cyber attacks are targeted to our users in order to compromise their user credentials and to get the initial access to our systems. So what can we do to prevent this? First of all, we need to design a plan of training and awareness activities adapted to our employees, to the different groups of our employees. As part of this plan, we need to prepare and deliver different training materials, such as videos, games, short training modules covering basic cybersecurity topics, such as social engineering, phishing, scams, passwords and multi-factor authentication, frauds, malware. And we need to find which are the best channels to deliver this information to our users. Then, periodically, we need to train and test our users with what is called ethical phishing campaigns or ethical phishing exercises. These are great exercises that allow you to measure your level of protection at the same time that you train your users against these threats of phishing and social engineering techniques. This is also a basic recommendation that all companies should follow to strengthen one of the most important parts, that is the human firewall. So moving on, this is the third one. The third point is to adopt a zero trust mindset and to select and deploy appropriate cybersecurity technology. This is a more advanced point. This is a medium level maturity point, let's say. So what is zero trust? Zero trust starts from the premise that any company can be under attack and that companies' resources nowadays are delocalized and accessible through the internet in most cases due to, for instance, the remote work. No? So we have seen that criminals look to compromise user credentials in order to access any resource of the company. So the idea is to protect our identities and our resources wherever they are, and to verify any access from by our identities to our resources, not trusting only in the credentials of our users, which we have seen that can be compromised, but for instance, using other protection measures such as multi-factor authentication. So in order to achieve this, we need to follow what is called a security in-depth strategy, assessing and selecting appropriate technology, first to protect not only our data, but also our identities, their accesses, for instance, through the use of conditional access or multi-factor authentication, our applications, the endpoints of our users, our networks and infrastructures, the cloud, and so on. So we need to protect, first of all our assets with appropriate technology. Then, in addition, we need to improve our detection capabilities with technology that help us to monitor and to detect suspicious events in our systems and also in our identities. So doing so, we will be able to detect and react rapidly in case we are detecting a potential security event in our systems or in our assets. And also, very important and critical in these days where any company can be target of a cyber attack, we need to work as well on our incident response and recovery strategies, and we need to test them periodically, because we need to be prepared for cyber attacks, so that when our company is under attack and we are in the middle of an incident, we all know what we need to do and how we have to act in order to minimize the impact of the attack in our company and to recover our systems appropriately and as soon as possible. And the frameworks that we have discussed before can help, for instance, in this part as well. Of course, this point is not easy. As I said at the beginning of the slide, this is a more advanced point, but there is an additional one. The fourth point, and the last one, is to stay ahead of cyber attacks. This is the most, let's say, advanced measure in maturity, and it is about taking a proactive approach and detecting attacks even before they happen, when they are being orchestrated in the underground in order to improve prevention. This first point is provided by what is called threat intelligence. And moreover, it is about detecting and taking down fraudulent websites and social network accounts that our adversaries use to impersonate our companies and to steal our user credentials or to perform fraud campaigns against our customers. This is very usual, most of all in the retail and the financial sectors. This second point is provided by what is called threat hunting. And how can we articulate this in our companies, the threat intelligence or threat hunting? By using threat intelligence platforms to gain visibility on the underground markets and forums in the dark web, where attackers are orchestrated, where attacks are orchestrated by the attackers, by these threat actors that we have known as APTs. No? Also, these platforms can allow us to find compromised or stolen credentials that are being sold in the black markets and can help us solve the problem before threat actors gain the initial access to our systems. For instance, identifying these compromised credentials, changing them before they are used, or analyzing if the user laptop has been compromised with an info stealer, for instance. And finally, using also these threat hunting platforms to identify and take down these fraudulent websites that are managed by attackers and used to steal credentials of our users or to perform fraud on the name of our company, which usually has a direct impact as well on the company's finance. Finally, before closing the presentation, I consider it's important to remark also a couple of tips to be protected from these cybersecurity threats also on our personal lives. So taking into account these the following three tips, I consider we can protect ourselves and our devices from most of the threats nowadays. The first tip is to protect your passwords. In these days, we use passwords to access everything, our banking accounts, our personal and corporate emails, our mobile devices, Netflix, and so on. And it is important that we do not reuse the same password to access different sites, since if I only have one password for all, once this password is compromised, everything is compromised. So instead of using the same password, you need to try to think in a methodology to create different passwords for different sites. For instance, using passphrases that make reference to the site instead of just a simple word. For instance, this is my password to access Facebook. You can use also, or you should use also, credential managers, which are publicly available and are free, like KeePass, that allows you to manage and protect your different passwords instead of storing them unprotected in an Excel file or in notepads without encryption in your desktop. And most importantly, you can never share your passwords, and you should activate multi-factor authentication to protect your accounts whenever possible. So if your password is stolen and a third party tries to access your account, if it is protected by a second mechanism with something you have, for instance, a mobile device, the attacker will not be able to finally compromise your account. Secondly, you have to be aware of social engineering techniques such as phishing through email, smishing through SMS, phishing through phone calls, and be aware also to the advance of artificial intelligence with the deepfakes. And finally, it's very important also to keep our devices up to date, installing releases as soon as they are published in order to avoid having exploitable vulnerabilities in our devices. For instance, our iPhones, Androids, tablets, iPads, laptops, everything. You have to get used to installing the updates on time and restart the device when it's required, okay? Because as we have seen before, this is one of the techniques used by attackers in order to gain access to the systems, exploiting public known vulnerabilities in the devices. So as I said before, following these three tips, I consider you can be protected against cyber insecurity. So that was all for today's session. I hope you enjoyed and found this useful. And thank you very much for your attention. Just as a brief recap, in the first part of the presentation, we have known a little bit more about APTs, the tactics they used to attack the companies, and the potential impact that we might suffer. And in the second part, we have gone through different tips that we can follow to protect both our companies and ourselves. So I hope you enjoyed this webinar, and please check my contact details so we can keep in touch and we can solve any doubt or further questions. Now, let's dedicate some minutes to the questions and answers. You can type on the question and answers chat if you have any doubt. So here we have Dario. I have a question. How can artificial intelligence help companies improve their cybersecurity? Well, we have other question from Alex. So that's a good question. We have already talked during the presentation how the artificial intelligence is being used by our adversaries to prepare more sophisticated attacks. For instance, to elaborate malware or phishing campaigns that can adapt, learn, and evade our traditional defenses. But of course, the security teams on the good side, let's say, of the cybersecurity, must also make use of this technology of artificial intelligence to improve our protection, detection, and response capabilities. No? So, for instance, I consider that artificial intelligence can assist in the information protection during the identification, classification, labeling, and protection of sensitive and confidential information wherever it is located. And for instance, for example, also coordinating with data leak prevention systems and responding in real time by blocking or encrypting sensitive data to prevent its exfiltration from our systems. No? Also, in the field of access management and authentication, which is an essential part of the zero trust strategy, as we have commented in the presentation, artificial intelligence can assist analyzing the user context and behavior and adapting the level of verification and the security required to prevent unauthorized access to certain systems or sensitive information. And also, as I said before, in the detection of security incidents, I think artificial intelligence can also help. It can help improve the detection capabilities of our current tools. For instance, being able to filter and analyze big amounts of information and discarding false positives. Sometimes the monitoring tools generate a huge amount of false positives, and artificial intelligence can help on that. And also by assisting the security analysts in gathering and summarizing all the information related to the context of a potential incident. No? If we focus more specifically, if we think in the case of phishing or spoofing attacks via email, SMS, or even phone calls, I think artificial intelligence can help improve the detection and blocking of these attacks by analyzing the email content and identifying patterns, anomalies, and suspicious language on them. So in general, I think that artificial intelligence can help the security teams to improve their efficiency. For example, to decrease the time that they dedicate to routine tasks such as report generation. No? I hope that answers the question, Dario. This other question from well, the regulations around artificial intelligence, it's true that we have seen in this last year several directives or regulations trying to define how we should use this technology. Maybe there are different regulations in the American markets and in the European markets, but we expect to see during this 2024 and the coming years that, let's say, more mature regulations around this technology. You say if the only penalty of not adhering to cybersecurity regulation is a fine, do you believe there is a loophole for multi-million? Well, we are seeing companies like TikTok or Meta that do not protect, let's say, the privacy of the users as much as other, let's say, smaller companies, because maybe the impact of the fines on their revenues are not so big as for small companies. As we have seen, Meta, for instance, has more than $2 billion fines of GDPR and compliance. But I think this is something that is up to users, no? If you see that these companies are not protecting your privacy as they should do, for instance, or they are not protecting the information you share with them as they should, it's up to the users how many information you want to share with these big companies. No? Is there any software that simulates cyber attacks which could be used for companies? Yeah, there are. In cybersecurity, there are many different kinds of providers and manufacturers. And of course, there are companies that have developed softwares that simulate cyber attacks and even using artificial intelligence, and that can be used by companies in order to improve their detection and response capabilities. It's important, of course, that you adapt this software to your systems or to your company, and that you manage the different tests and attacks that are launched, let's say, by these tools. But yes, this kind of software exists in the market and can be used by companies to improve their cybersecurity and their protection and detection capabilities. So do companies ask for certification or proof of cybersecurity when dealing with another company? Yes, actually, it's very, very common, most common in the last years, that we need to, and these regulations that I have commented, like the Network Information Security 2, define corporate responsibilities not only to manage our own cybersecurity in our company, for the companies affected by the regulation, but also to manage and to improve or to reduce, let's say, the level of risk of our collaborators. So we need to take responsibility as well of the risk that our collaborators suppose to information security. And a good way to manage this is to ask for certifications or cybersecurity proofs to these companies. No, in this way, there are several certifications and there are several standards that companies can use to certificate their cybersecurity programs or information security programs, like the information systems, the information security management systems defined by the ISO 27000, or the national security scheme in Spain, as I commented. These are standards or mechanisms that companies can use to improve their security governance and can use to share with third companies that require to check their level of security in order to collaborate with them. No? So this is something very common. Do you think Russia has been behind the series of cyber attacks? Yeah, sure. As I said during the presentation, in the last years, and maybe motivated or promoted by the geopolitical context we are living today and the conflicts that there are between Russia and Ukraine and now in Gaza as well, there is an increase of cyber attacks targeting the Western companies or the companies in the Western countries, such as in Europe and in the UK and in the US, and most of them are carried out by these APTs, these groups that are linked to the Russian government. So in some cases, they are used to generate or to create instability in the society, trying to attack specific websites of public companies or administrations, or even the government agencies. But in other cases, they also target specific private companies that manage critical infrastructures or that provide a service to the society. And that's the way they try to create instability in these countries. So yeah, it has to do, and it's linked with this geopolitical context in which we live. And most of the attacks that we see in these days in Europe can be linked to Russia. For instance, in the US, these attacks are more linked to China, but also to Russia. It's possible to identify the source of the attack. Well, this is a difficult question. As I said before, one of the things companies can use to be more proactive and even to prevent and detect the attacks before they happen is to use the threat intelligence, because this is information that can give you, let's say, hints of who or what groups of threat actors are trying to elaborate attacks against your company or against your specific sector in your specific country. So in that way, you can try to identify, as you say, the source of the attack or the beginning of the attack, even before the attack is finally delivered against the company. No? And you can get prepared in advance, or you can, as I said before, identify the accounts that they have compromised in order to protect them. So, but once you receive the attack, if it is, for instance, a ransomware attack, it's easy to identify the source of the attack, because in the ransomware attacks, usually the threat actors, the attackers, leave a message on the compromised systems with a rescue note saying that this attack has been carried out by this specific group, and even they give you a way to contact them through dark web channels so that you can talk to them and you can negotiate the ransom payment in order for them to give you back the information that has been stolen and the keys to decrypt your systems. So it's easy to identify who is behind the attack, but in some cases this is not very helpful, let's say. Is there any other question or something that is not clear?
Well, I think we don't have more questions. As we said, thank you, Javier. This was a fantastic session, very, very informative and useful. As we said, we will be sharing Javier details and the presentation also via email later this morning. So if you have any more questions, you can reach Javier and Stratesys directly. Also, the recording will be sent, so feel free to share it with your colleagues. I think it's a topic of great interest to everyone. So this is the end of the session. Thanks again, Javier, and also Stratesys for collaborating with us today. It was a fantastic session, and thank all the attendees for joining us this morning. Just to finish, we do have a busy event calendar in the upcoming weeks, so feel free to check our website or contacting any colleague of the Chamber if you wish to attend to any or some of our events. And thank you so much for joining us this morning. Thank you, and
Thank you
enjoy
very much.
the day. Thank you.